In just 4 years of driving at the age of 21, I have owned 6 cars. I have just one word for this car. Oh yes, viewers, it was time. It was time for me to buy my dream attainable car. Hello and welcome back to the channel. So today I'm going to talk you through my car history because at the age of 21, I've owned 6 cars in just 4 years of driving on the roads. But first, a look back on the real reason that I'm a petrol head. You see, you can trace cars so far back in my family tree. My granddad on my dad's side, for example, was a mechanic for most of his working life. He worked in independent garages and in a Porsche garage for a period of time too. He also loved classic Volkswagens such as Beetles and Type 2 vans and owned so many. This passion for Volkswagens, especially classics, was inherited by my dad, and inevitably I also inherited that gene too. Fun fact about my granddad Brian, he competed in a competition in 1982 to remove and reinstall and then drive under its own power a Volkswagen Beetle engine. He won the competition with his friend by far, with 3 minutes and 16 seconds as their final time. He constantly talks about that moment, and I do not blame him, because if I did that, I would talk about it for the rest of my life. I can't even fathom how quick that is to remove, reinstall, and drive a car. I grew up around Volkswagens, and this is the main one that I grew up around. This is my dad's Type 2 van. Now, it used to be a bright yellow colour. It's now sat in primer because it needs restoring. It's been off the road for over 10 years and it looks a little bit sorry for itself, to be honest. And my granddad actually sold my dad this van because it needed so much work doing. But growing up, this was really quite a big part of my childhood and I've got such fond memories of it. So fond, in fact, that I've actually got a tattoo of it right here on my leg. Dad with his cars, well, nowadays I'd say he's boring. He would call it sensible, I suppose, in his words. He's always had a keen interest in them. His very first car was a classic Mini with a Metro straight-through exhaust on it, which I'm told by him was the absolute bollocks back in the day. My grandparents would definitely disagree with that statement though. But when I was growing up, Dad had so many different cars. There are a few that stuck out though. He had a Ford Ka in a horrible burgundy colour, which he actually picked up for free. He welded the sills up, added a coil spring to it because it was broken, and drove it around until it was on its last legs. And then at the end of that, he sold it on for an overall profit, which I think is so impressive. He also had a Ford Mondeo Estate in a gold colour, which sounds disgusting on the face of it, but it had a huge screen in the middle with a sat nav. It didn't work, but it was still cool to me at the time. It had heated seats amongst other things as well. He also had a transporter van, a Type 4 VW one, which was a builder's van. It had really high springs on the back, so it looked a little bit silly. It also had 3 seats in the front as like a bench, and that was a really cool van, and I know he loved that one and he was sad to see it go. More recently, he used to drive around in a Seat Altea FR, which was a 1.9 PD TDI engine. Lovely car. Well, not really on the outside, but the engine was great and it ran quite well. He also, most recently, his own car was a BMW 420d xDrive, which was a lovely, lovely spec. Exterior-wise, it was quite basic and you wouldn't really think it was a great car looking at it, but inside that car was amazing. It had Harman Kardon, big screen as well, heated seats, the lot. It was fully loaded. Fun fact with that car, well, not so fun for Dad, it got stolen off the drive just under a year ago. He was gutted because that car was a lovely, lovely spec. But today he drives around in a Mini Cooper, which is a company car. It's one of the brand new Minis, so there will be a full video review coming of that car very soon on this channel, so stick around for that one. But how could I forget my mum? Well, it's her fault that I'm so impulsive when it comes to buying cars, because she's the exact same. Growing up, she had one car that sticks out to me. It was an Astra 1.9 diesel. Doesn't sound special on the face of it, but it had one key feature that I loved. It had a sport button, which I used to beg her to press all the time. And to be fair to Mum, she made that car seem fast, even though it probably wasn't at all. But more recently, Mum's had some pretty cool and interesting cars. She had an Audi A3 S-Line, which was, I like to say, drug dealer spec. It was white on the outside, black leather interior, really heavily tinted windows, but a nice car on the face of it. She then moved on to a BMW 120d, which she loved, but there was one complaint. It wasn't very good in the snow. So she then did what any sane and logical person would do. She bought a BMW M135i xDrive, one of the new shape ones. She told us that she had no intention of buying a car when she went to the dealership, but apparently the deal was too good to refuse. So she came back with a 135i. Dad wasn't too impressed by this, but I was buzzing. This was a great moment. Mom had a really cool car and I couldn't wait to have a spin in it. She didn't let me drive it ever, which I'm gutted about, but Dad also eventually came around to the idea and used to enjoy driving that car around, although he would say otherwise. Mom then moved on to a Cooper S, which is what she owns now, because she does more driving for her job as a district nurse and she needed something a little bit more sensible. In her words, it's not really any more sensible than the 135i, but it's slightly better on fuel. Mom is a proper driver as well. All these cars were not for show. She actually drives them quite hard. And she's a better driver than me. I'll hold my hands up there. She'll love to hear that. But that's my mum's history on cars. But enough about all of them. Here's my car history, the part that you've been waiting for. You see, the story starts with a 17-year-old Josh who's just passed his driving test. First time with just 4 minors, just to add that in there. Now, I'd spent a short while prior to passing my test deciding which car I'd want to buy. That's a complete lie. I'd spent 5 years before I passed my test thinking about what car I might want to buy. I've been working hard at my job at McDonald's at the time to save as much money as I could for my first car. But with my measly budget of £600, I was really quite limited with choices. And eventually I decided that the car for me was a Mark II Renault Clio. After scouring Facebook Marketplace for about 2 days, there she was, the one. 141,000 miles, hardly any service history, and it was a Camper Sport. Now, for you non-Renault enthusiasts over there, a Camper Sport Clio basically just means it's got alloy wheels instead of steels, and it's got painted bumpers instead of those horrible plastic ones. But this didn't matter to me. It was my first car and I promptly paid the man 600 Great British pounds. I actually haggled him down from 650 because I'm basically Mike Brewer 2.0.
We'll do 16 and a half.
Hold out your end.
Yes! And drove it away on that day. Now, for about 1.5 years, that car did not cause me any major issues. Well, there was one. It was the clutch. So the clutch went about 2 months into me having that car, and myself and my dad had a lovely father-son bonding moment installing a Renault Clio clutch on the driveway in the middle of winter. Safe to say, Dad's never really been too happy about my car purchase choices. That car was really actually quite a good one, especially for a Renault. After 15,000 miles in that car and 1.5 years, it was time to say goodbye because at its MOT, it failed catastrophically on quite a few things. And for me, it made no sense to repair and I really wanted to move on to something a bit more powerful and a bit quicker. So I sold the Clio for I think £150 and some guy took it off me. He went and put it back on the road and to this day it's still on the road. On its most recent MOT it had done 171,000 miles. So there's someone out there with a Hornet back box delete and some stickers on a Clio driving it around every single day, which does make me quite happy to hear. But now viewers, it's time for possibly my worst motoring decision to date. I decided to purchase a 2006 Mini Cooper.
No, God! No, God, please, no! No!
I have just one word for this car. You'll see a pattern start to emerge with my cars. I find it very, very difficult to buy a car under 100,000 miles. My Mini had done 131,000 miles and its timing chain was just about ready to snap. Apart from it being overall a little bit ropey and not really running right some of the time, the car didn't actually cause me too much grief. The problems that I had were really quite self-inflicted. The first problem that I had is that I tried to fit a Hornet exhaust to this car yet again, and it failed. It melted the bumper surround and completely wrecked it. So I had to buy a complete new system from eBay. I took the opportunity to buy a full system from Gravity Performance, a catback one. This was such a mistake because it didn't even sound good and it cost me so much more money than it would have cost to just get a back box delete done at a local garage. The second problem I had, again, was clutch, episode 2. So myself and Dad had another father-son bonding experience. You can imagine just how happy my dad was to hear that my clutch was done again. Despite the fact that this car had the dreadful Peugeot engine whose internals can only be described as chocolate, there were some positive bits about owning this car. Number one, it had a 1.6 engine, which when it worked was actually quite nice to drive. Number two, my dad, when I bought it, thankfully he de-chromed it for me, as all Mini owners do, and it did look pretty good after it had been de-chromed. But the worst part about all of these timing chain issues is that at the time I was doing a really long commute, and I used to have to get the car out of limp mode whilst I was on the motorway. So at 70 miles an hour, I would press the start button, undo the key, put it back in, and it would have full power again, which was really not very safe at all. So mercifully, I was left with no choice other than to get rid of the Mini. So I part X'd it for the grand total of £500 against my next car, my Mark 7.5 Fiesta Zetec S 1.5 diesel. This was my first nice car. Well, nice. It was a 2012, it had done 78,000 miles, and it basically felt like new to me. Don't get me wrong, it was a little bit boaty to drive, but I fixed that. I put some lowering springs on it. And sometimes you'd think I do want a little bit more power. It only had 95 horsepower, but again, don't worry, I fixed that. I remapped it to 120. After its remap, it was still good on fuel, and it was a little bit more fun to drive. It wasn't blow your socks off, but it was enough to get you around and to have a little bit of fun. Now, I actually really liked this car, even when it wasn't modified. I thought it was really comfortable. It was great to drive. It was nice inside as well. It had rear parking sensors, front heated screen because it was a Ford. It was a proper upgrade from my Mini, and I was really happy with it. It used to return 45 miles per gallon even when you were booting it, which to me was mental. I was spending no money on fuel. It was so cheap on tax. And you might hear all this and think, why the hell did you get rid of it then? Well, it was because I had decided that it was time. Oh yes, viewers, it was time. It was time for me to buy my dream attainable car. This car I'd thought about for years. Ever since I owned my first Clio, I bought my 2009 Renault Clio RS200. This car was genuinely everything to me. From the moment that I got this car, I fell in love with it. And despite a few teething issues at the start, which were mainly the fault of the dealer that I bought it from, I just could not get enough of this car. It was everything that I dreamed of. The car was a cup chassis, not cup pack, so it didn't have the wing, but it did have the suspension to go with it. And it also had the Neanthracite pack, I think I'm saying that wrong, but it had a few little grey coloured areas. It was completely standard, apart from a res delete, and my God, did it sound good. So as you've just heard, that car sounded amazing. That 2-litre naturally aspirated engine revved all the way to 8,500 revs. Don't quote me on the exact figure, but it was around there. Above 5,500 revs, it had a VTEC type thing. It was variable valve timing, but it sounded better than VTEC. I don't care what you say. If you gave me any hot hatch from that era against my Renault Clio, it would be the Renault Clio any day of the week. But I am a bit biased because I truly loved that car. Now you might be wondering why I got rid of it. Well, life kind of got in the way. I just could not afford to keep running that car. It was costing me so much in fuel each week and, well, each month. The insurance was quite expensive. The tax was £365 a year. I just decided that I needed to get rid of it because it just didn't make financial sense to keep hold of that car. I'd had my fun in it. I needed something a little bit more economical and cheaper to run. So as gutted as I was about letting the Clio go, the search had to begin for my new daily. Now I'd set my sights on a diesel because I needed to save some money on fuel and running costs. After a bit of research on Facebook Marketplace and some on Auto Trader as well, I managed to come across my new daily, my Volkswagen Mark 6 2-litre TDI Golf. As you know, in my family there is a long history of Volkswagens, and well, my thoughts were Volkswagen plus diesel is probably quite good, and it really was. This car was brilliant. 111,000 miles, which everyone will know for a 2-litre TDI is basically just about broken in. It had a full service history, stacks of paperwork. I even had a receipt from a Volkswagen main dealer for some wiper blades that had been replaced. I think it was something stupid like 60 something quid that someone paid for a set of wiper blades all round, which I couldn't believe. The car really didn't cause me much grief when I owned it. I replaced the front brake discs and pads and one caliper because one of them stuck on and completely ruined the discs and pads. It was literally bare metal by the end. And Also, I serviced it twice during my ownership. I did a lot of miles in that car. When I sold it, it was on 127,000 miles. I'd only owned it for 6 months, bearing in mind. I also modified this car, surprisingly. It was a 2-litre diesel and I modified it. I put an induction kit on it, which made a bit of a stupid sound if I'm honest, but it did make me smile from time to time when I'd hear the whooshing sound when I let off the throttle. And I posted that on TikTok actually, and it did really quite well on my account. Have you ever wondered what a 2-litre diesel sounds like with an induction kit on it? But if you answered yes, this video's for you. You might be thinking, why the hell did you get rid of the car then if it was so brilliant? I literally can't fault this car, by the way. Even to this day, it was great. The simple fact is that I was just a little bit bored. It wasn't very inspiring to drive and it wasn't very interesting to look at. So eventually my impulsive nature took over that I inherited from my mum and I sold the Golf. I then bought my current car, my E91 320d Touring. A lovely metallic grey colour, a cream interior, a 6-speed manual gearbox, and it was on 161,000 miles with a brilliant history behind it. How could you say no to that? If you go back and watch my first video on this channel, it's a full review of that car. It's well worth a watch if you're interested to see some more details and specification on my lovely E91 320d Touring that you can see just over there. So far, I really can't fault the BMW. I love it, and I've really fell in love with this car so much more than I ever did with my Golf, and I've only owned the BMW for 2 weeks. If you want to see how BMW life unfolds for me and maybe some potential issues and modifications in the future, please consider hitting the subscribe button and liking this video for some more content. Sit down. Good boy. But all that's left to say from me and from Basil is that we hope you enjoyed this video. Please, again, hit that subscribe button if you want to see how my journey unfolds. Thank you.